Councillor Dillon.
I have a child under CAMS and speech therapy, so I just think I should mention it.
Okay, thank you. Okay, has everybody had a chance to have a look at the minutes of the previous meeting? Okay, and can we record those as being correct? Yeah. Okay, so we've got a fairly full agenda this evening, so I'm going to invite Karen Samples, who is our Director of Education, Standards, Performance and Quality Assurance, to give us a presentation on closing the gap, which is reducing educational inequalities within Trafford. Thanks, Karen.
Thank you. Hopefully you've all had sight of this report that's been sent through previously, but it's on the screen just so that can draw your attention to anything that I feel is quite pertinent, and also it perhaps helps you if you have any other questions as well. I think it's worth noting that the initial report for closing the gap was done quite a long time ago, actually. So I was very mindful of some of the detail that had been reported previously, and hopefully this is about presenting where we are now in relation to that. So that was just a little bit of the background, really, that I do know that there's been some previous work before. The first section around background really kind of identifies how important and certainly what a priority the performance and outcomes for our disadvantaged children are and young people. In education now, we do have a vision for education, and that's something that's new to Trafford Council. And this is going to be delivered through an education board. We're part and parcel of a lot of GM work that is looking at the statutory functions, particularly around education, and how different local authorities are delivering on those statutory functions, and in particularly the improvement of some of the outcomes for those children. So certainly disadvantaged children, or reducing the gap, is one of the key strategic priorities for our education board as well. And members of those boards include not only heads, but teaching schools, local authority officers, the elected member, because it's important we get the right kind of stakeholders around the table to deliver on those priorities. In terms of disadvantaged, the term itself, as we know, is very broad. And in that second paragraph, it's identified there as, poverty, potential learning difficulties, social and emotional difficulties. All of these we acknowledge can create real barriers to learning for some of our children and young people. When it comes to data and performance measures, disadvantaged is actually defined as any child in receipt of pupil premium. So that is those children who are free school meals and also are looked after children. So it's really important to note that when we talk about disadvantaged in outcomes and data outcomes, it is those groups. And also what difference they're making to disadvantaged children. It's those two groups that they're focusing on. So I think it's really important that you recognise that as well. And as I've said there, obviously the introduction of the pupil premium funding, it still stands. It's still in place, and schools are still accountable for the spending and the impact of that pupil premium funding. So they will be challenged on that by Ofsted. So in terms of the role of schools and settings, obviously, as I say, they have that funding to make a difference to these children. I think one of the challenges is for us as a local authority is because of our statutory functions and how much we can actually do to direct a school is very limited. There's that real increased autonomy within schools. We still have to kind of evolve and adapt our way of monitoring that. So we still make sure we endeavour to do that through many of our quality assurance measures around how we hold schools to account, and also some of our PVIs and our early years settings as well. And hopefully this paper sets out what we're actually doing, where the issues still remain, what the impact has been so far, and what the next steps are going to be. So in terms of early years, basically what the data has shown us, and I think I've already shared some of the data with you previously over the last couple of meetings, but particularly in relation to disadvantage now. And what you can see in the data set there is free school meals, FSM, but also PP. Now, the PP children will include the LAP children as well, the looked after children. So that's where the difference is. We know, as we've said before, that overall we perform extremely well by the end of early years. We've done that over time. We know it places us very high nationally and certainly at the top across North West. What is still of concern is that the performance of our free school meals and PP children is, although improved this year again at early years, is still below national free school meals and PP children. So that still remains a priority for us in early years and certainly within education as well. When schools are measured in those outcomes, they're actually measured against national non-FSM free school meals children, because Ofsted believe that actually schools have some money here to make a difference. So the expectation is that they will make even more difference because they've got funding attached to them. So the lines of accountability are very high for our schools. However, as a local authority, we have a strategic early years board. And that board is very aware of what the data is telling you. And I think I've talked in the past about how we've done a real deep dive on that data. We've got 2 very detailed place-based plans now, because a lot of these children we know are in certain areas, the North and Partington. So we've got some very detailed place-based plans, which is aimed at improving attainment for children in those areas where we know there is high disadvantage and attainment remains low. And those are some of the priorities that are being discussed and are part of our strategic planning. A lot of it is around the pathways. So this involves some of our SEND children as well, along the pathways that are being scoped and delivered. We're looking certainly at a health visiting review. We're looking at very much an integrated review as part of the 2-year check. And that's been signed off. So we've got a new model working forwards to deliver once needs have been identified through assessments. And so this will be during PVI settings, really, rather than when they actually get into a school-based provision. Talked about the locality-based working that's going on there as well. But we have also got a teaching school that's being commissioned. That's actually through Altrincham Girls Grammar. It's their teaching school. It's one of our infant school heads that is delivering on that. She's a specialist leader in I think she's a local leader in education actually, but she's an early years specialist, and she's commissioned to develop some transition work as well between settings as children move into schools, because we recognise that is an area as well that we need to improve on. And then equally, we're looking at parenting offers as well to be mapped out so that we can, again, support the parents in that early identification. We obviously, as one of the second priorities, it's around making sure we've got high quality provision. And we do actually have that. The percentages of good and outstanding PVI settings and nursery settings is exceptionally high, and certainly in those graduate leaders in those PVIs as well. So the conditions are all right for things to be better for our children in early years. But we're continuing to develop the training programme, making sure that there's a workforce development programme wrapped around those settings, again, to make sure we increase the capacity and scope within those settings. Obviously, outcomes for SEND is very much part of our early years as well as our SEND board agenda. And again, we're focusing an awful lot on the pathways, certainly around autism, social communication, speech and language. Welcome training is being rolled out across some of the PVIs as well. And certainly the early years graduated approach as well has been shaped. Again, to make sure that we're covering all of the challenges that are being faced in early years. So there's an awful lot of work going on to make sure that we do target certainly the children in the early days to try and get the provision absolutely right so that they can carry on and have a successful future. In terms of key stage 2 performance, I've gone sort of to the next milestone, if you like. In terms of free school meals and PP children again, what you've got there is, I'm just going to check through. Yeah, it's the right slide, the right part. Again, I think I've shared this certainly with the SEND. In terms of our groups for the expected standard at Key Stage 2 for all the different subjects, we remain above. So our free school meals children achieve really well, as do our disadvantaged children at Key Stage 2. Where we're not doing as well is the higher standard for those children. So what we're asking schools to do is identify those free school meals children or disadvantaged children who are actually higher attaining. And we're expecting that any pupil premium money is not necessarily targeted at intervention and at the weaker end, but actually we're challenging them to make sure that money is used to really accelerate progress so that they achieve their potential at the higher end as well. So that's certainly where the focus is within schools, and it will be part of our quality assurance visits as well. In terms of progress, the progress of pupils in Trafford from Key Stage 1 and 2 has improved this year, and again continues to remain well above national and the Northwest data as well. At Key Stage 4, now this is a very, very kind of complex table really, because there's an awful lot of detail within it. And also, we've got Progress 8, we've got Attainment 8, and then we've also looked at the percentages of pupils achieving grade 5+ in English and maths. This is where at Key Stage 4, we traditionally had an issue with the gap. What we found was the gap was wide in early years, it narrowed by the time we got to Key Stage 2, and then it opened back up again at the end of Key Stage 4. And actually in 2018, we've actually narrowed the gap significantly at Key Stage 4. What we found was that when we analysed some of the data, as we know, the complexity of the context of Trafford sometimes presents an issue. We've got grammar schools, we've got obviously we've got secondary schools, high schools, we've got girls' schools, boys' schools, faith schools. We've got the whole mix here, which complicates things slightly and certainly complicates the transition process from Key Stage 2 into high school, into secondary school. But when we break it down, what we actually see is there is an uneven distribution of our disadvantaged pupils, as you can see. Disadvantaged pupils, however, when they do access grammar, they do achieve in line basically with their peers. So they do achieve exceptionally well. In terms of the high schools, what we did was we actually again did a deep dive, and we had a look at which schools we were concerned about in terms of outcomes for disadvantaged pupils at secondary. And 5 schools were kind of named, if you like. And we accessed funding for them to embark in some collaborative work to improve outcomes for their children. We sought some external providers to come and provide training for them, and certainly got them really thinking about the impact of their pupil premium funding. This year, certainly for this 2018 data, what it reflects is a project that they worked on around metacognition. So it's very much around thinking skills, really, and getting some of our students to really learn to kind of be able to understand what their thinking process is. And that has made pupils an identification of pupils as well at Key Stage 4. But what we've actually seen is a massive decrease now in the gap. And actually our outcomes for pupil premium looked after children has improved this year, which is absolutely fantastic. Those 5 targeted secondary schools have also received pupil premium reviewer training. So they've actually accessed the training that's available so that they can do their own internal pupil premium reviews as well, which has been very powerful. So in terms of next steps for us, we've actually had a pupil premium network launch where we had the regional HMI come along and talk to us in Trafford. And we made it very clear that, outcomes do need to improve and need to continue to improve. We showcase work from both the primary and a secondary school to everybody so that there were some examples of good practice that were making a significant difference in our schools. What we've agreed to do as a school improvement service is to target any schools where we're not happy with the impact of pupil premium spending that's been going on. It's not, there's still a level of underperformance, and we'll be carrying out pupil premium health checks to check that out. We've also identified good practice and schools that are struggling to partner up. So there's some capacity for peer-to-peer work as well. So we've established those links, and also the use of governors forum as well, to make sure, because ultimately it's the governors that should be holding the leaders to account for the impact of pupil premium funding. So we've targeted the training for governors as well. So that's something that we're working through at the moment, and as I say, it is a strategic priority for the Education Board as well. And just finally, really, closing the attainment of the good practice. Those were some of the examples I think I've talked about, actually, about how we have brought schools together in collaboration to do some really successful projects. 2 of our schools are also accessing funding from the Greater Manchester Education and Employability Board's pilot project, which is, again, is a bit like a peer-to-peer review, really. They're working in trios, and there's some research-based work going on as well. Again, it's particularly for those schools that have made a significant difference, and we're trying to create that directory of effective practice for sharing across the region. Thank you. Any questions?
Any members have any questions at all? Okay. Linda, do you want to start?
Thank you. Oh, good evening. Can I just ask a question about the pupil premium network? How is it actually going to work? Is it sort of done where you have sort of meetings every quarter, or is contact by sort of one named person in each school? Can you just explain, please?
Yes, certainly. It's been tasked to one of our school improvement advisors, so he's taken it on. At the moment, he's using the Deputy Head Works network because that's really well attended at the moment. And we've actually got a Deputy Heads conference coming up as well in the Lake District, and one of the keynote speakers is all around the disadvantaged attainment as well. So he's kind of piggybacking it onto that forum because it's well attended. You find a lot of deputies have got this responsibility as well, but equally he will, as I say, we launched the main network anyway with all schools. All schools were invited, but we are doing some targeted work for those where we know we need to address any underperformance as well. We're hoping, certainly he's meeting with deputies every term at the moment. But then obviously we'll intersperse with some of those targeted reviews as well in between.
Could I just ask, is there any indication at all that certain schools are not targeting the money appropriately?
It's a difficult one for us to say, because it's not our role to challenge that. That's down to the governing bodies to challenge that. All we can do is we can look at where there's a history of underperformance for our PP children. On school websites, they should be actually showing their impact statement for pupil premium funding. So that's readily available. It's in the public domain and anybody can access that on websites. That's the mechanism by which we can check. But when we do our quality assurance visits to every school in the local authority, in terms of data, our focus is always on disadvantaged. We don't actually focus too much on the overall attainment. We're homing in on disadvantaged pupils, and that's in its broadest sense, i.e. SEND, all the vulnerable groups, because we know Trafford schools perform well. It is showing that's where the focus needs to be.
Yes, just wonder if you say a bit more about the parenting offer, because I think in the documents it refers specifically to identification of mental health needs, but I would have thought that parenting offer would extend much more broader than that, to think about sort of supporting parents in terms of equipping them to support their children's development before they start school, etc.
Sarah, that might be something you can sort of help with as well, because Sarah is our head of early years as well, and because it was part of the early years strategic plan, and she supports in the workforce development and the pathways that are being rolled out. So
I think you're right. So I think what you probably picked up on from the report was around supporting parents and infant mental health, and then new mums supporting mental health. I don't have a lot of detail about the parenting offer, but we do have a parenting offer. Don't know if it's something commissioning can pick up.
We will be mentioning some of that, within our report a bit later on. So there's some support around perinatal mental health and stuff, for that. Is that what you?
I think I was thinking more of the wider. There is a parenting offer, isn't there, that's delivered through our Children's Centre and Early Help Hubs, targeted parenting offer. So which is perhaps more of the type of thing that you're thinking of. Detail. Yeah.
Okay, so we use a model in Trafford called Webster Stratton, and that is available through our children's centres. It's not as it can't be for every parent, so we've got to target it to the right parents. But the children's centres do work specifically from Partington, and there's another one based in the north of the borough, but they will work across the whole borough. And they will target the parents where it's felt that that will be a way of strengthening their ability to parent their child and cope with some of the challenges that are presented by their children. But I think we are looking to try and make our parenting offer a little bit more coherent in future, because what we currently have is the children's centres do bits, and then we have a team that's funded by the CCG that do bits under the Family Support Service. And then we find that we've got some specialist parenting programs that we've got that are more about teenagers and things. So I think we need to map it better for the future, but there is quite a significant offer available under what they call the incredible years.
I will say one of the things we've done as part of the deep dive is we've had a look at those children who didn't achieve a good level of development, and kind of identify the kind of circumstances that sit behind that, because that's a lot to do with parenting and the needs of the family. So those ACEs children, there may be domestic abuse, all kinds of sort of challenging circumstances within the family. And certainly some of the actions are being scoped out now through the North Project as well as the Partington Project. One of the other issues we've identified with Partington is that it's trying to address, although young children have access to high quality PVIs, they're not always attending. So, there's a lot of work, there's a lot of door knocking, there's a lot of work going on to ensure that these families are actually getting their children into the provision as well. But I think you're right, Kathy, it's kind of pockets of bits of stuff going on that we need to make more cohesive. Yeah, I understand that.
Yeah, it's on the same point, really. You probably answered most of what I was going to ask, but obviously it is new, the place-based plans that you have, and it's how we do tap into those children prior to school, and clearly the families are absolutely key to the learning. And it seems that we've been, this is not a criticism of anybody, but slow to actually realise that factor. It's how, I suppose, we speed that up. And the health visiting plan that you mentioned, I'd like to know a little bit more about that and how you feel they will make a difference in terms of the impact that we want to be made.
Again, Sarah, you might want to chip in as well, but I think you're right. This is the first time we've ever done a real deep dive. So we've got data at a locality sort of basis, really. We've only ever before of what that data is telling us. And we've never probably really got under the skin as much as we have now about the circumstances behind children not achieving. So those challenges that are being presented. And yes, we acknowledge that, it's too late when they get into provision. It is too late, and we understand that. I think we have been hindered a little bit about lack of capacity as well across some of our services to be able to deliver. And I think we're now much more effective in working as an integrated team. So, sitting on the strategic boards now, it is education, it's health, it's social care. And so we've got all the right people around the table. In terms of the integrated review, it's a new process, isn't it? Whereby basically referrals can be made by either a health visitor or a setting. So this is basically, if any needs are picked up through some of the assessments and some of the screening that's done within settings, anyone can call that meeting. One of the challenges, I suppose, is it's with parental consent. And that always then can create a little bit of a challenge. But we're hoping that this will certainly improve and speed up, if you like, the process to access that support as soon as problems have been identified, because the outcome then would be a meeting and a clear plan of support and improvement. Do you want to
Sorry,
tap into?
shall I just say that the whole issue of school readiness has become a Greater Manchester priority, as well as we'd already identified it as a Trafford priority. And I have actually put down as a suggestion for the next Scrutiny Committee a detailed report on our school readiness project. So Sarah can give a summary, but I think probably you'll want the detail at that point in time, if that's okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I think just picking up on what Karen was talking about with the integrated review, in Trafford we have very high take-up of early education entitlements. So vulnerable 2-year-olds are entitled to a free early education place. We have around 98% of Trafford 2-year-olds in places, and then around 99% once you get to 3-year-olds. And then obviously they go into the school system. And I think what we're recognising with integrated reviews is the Health Visiting Service do a 2-year check with children. And that's often, a short time spent with the parent and the child. When a child's actually in an early education setting, we've got a much broader wealth of information about that child and how they're progressing. So the integrated reviews is an opportunity to bring all those people around the table to support earlier identification of need. And so we're really hoping that holistic approach will support us to identify those children that need more support and to get that support in place earlier. So that's really a summary of the integrated reviews. A lot of the other school readiness work we're doing really is just like what Karen said, is about trying to identify areas where we can actually make a difference and where some of what we have the ability to change or that extra support in a bit earlier will make a difference. I don't know if there's anything. Yeah, we're talking. Yeah.
Yeah, just a follow on really, because clearly when parents are not, responding to have that, as you say, at age 2, that setting that could be provided, that learning setting that could be provided, and they're not responding to that. How do you go about trying to circumvent that issue?
I think it's going to be a difficult one because, as I said, it's got to be with consent. I suppose ultimately we have to look at whether there's any risks around their lack of engagement as well. I suppose anything that we can do to support the child whilst they're in settings. It is a difficult one. I don't know whether we've kind of firmed anything up around that yet, really. That could be something that we can consider part of the early years board. It's very difficult to enforce anything. You are reliant upon consent.
And there is a balance to be struck, isn't there, for parental choice. And some parents choose to keep their children close to them for as long as possible. And actually, that was what we all did in the old days. So if that's their choice and it's not harming the child, then absolutely they should be supported to follow that. It's if perhaps we see that there's different for the child that we would encourage. But really, it is down to a parental choice. It's just helping them understand that what is available is in the best interests of their child.
If I could just add to that as well. What we found is the main reason that parents don't want to take up an early education place for the 2-year-old child is purely because they think their child is too young and they don't want to take that child out of the home environment at such an early age. And that is the predominant reason for people not taking up the place. But what we do is we try and support families to access other services, maybe drop-ins, shorter things rather than a 15-hour-a-week place.
I would say as well, just to kind of follow on from that, when I had a chat with a few schools in the north, because obviously that's where we're seeing some of the issues in terms of school readiness. The same kind of parental attitudes, exist within those schools, and some of it, you're absolutely right, it's choice. Some of it's cultural as well. And I think we just have to be mindful and respectful of that. But, there are lots of pieces of work that schools are doing in order to address those issues as well within the early years settings.
Yeah, I was just a bit confused. So you're saying that, so for the free childcare offer for 2-year-olds, there's 98% take up of that, but then parents are so there's take up of that, but then parents choose not to place their children in settings anyway, or am I not following?
Sorry, no, I mean, we do have a certain number of children that don't take up their place. When we report the take-up figures as well, there are things around the cross-border issue and people accessing in different areas does cloud those figures a bit. But 98% is our reported figure, but we know there are a cohort of families not taking up a place, and that's really the ones that we're talking about. So small group of families.
Yes, it's a relatively small group.
Yeah, it is, yeah.
People you're talking about.
Yeah.
But what can we actually do to get through that in terms of giving support in the home? Do we do that at all? I mean,
again, I suppose the only contact is the health visitor, and we know that the health visitor is the main person in those early years of life, and it's what we can achieve through health visiting. As I say, they're certainly part of the early years strategic plan. Members of the health visitors sit on the board. We were certainly scoping up, as I say, the 2-year review was something that we've just kind of passed through and got the okay for, in terms of health visitors as well, beyond that universal approach really. But I agree. I think you're right. There is a role for health here. And we certainly have those conversations, but we are looking at capacity for them to be able to deliver as well.
Most of the performance indicators seem to be around attainment. I just wondered if there's any kind of figures for whether the kids are happy and enjoying themselves as well.
Oh, I wish. I think it is a hard one, because at the end of the day, we want our children at the end of the day to be happy and safe and enjoying their learning. We can look at attendance figures and check that these children are actually turning up to school and enjoying their time at school. And to be honest with you, we're really looking forward to the new Ofsted framework, which actually is indicating that this is about quality of education now, not just outcomes. We know they're going to be threaded in there, they can't not. But we're really excited that actually Ofsted have taken a reasonable view now and are actually being a little bit more balanced. And so a school can create a curriculum that is right for their children. And when you consider some of the schools in areas of high deprivation, that curriculum is going to be really special. So actually, this is a really exciting opportunity, I think, for the schools.
Yes, we are working. If I could just make a small plea and request, I'd love to join you all on your deep dives, but I'm finding that I'm suffering from a degree of ignorance buoyancy, which is stopping me getting under the surface. There is a plethora of acronyms in this report, and I'm sorry if I'm the only person who doesn't understand most of them, but could we please have this journey with you rather than sitting quietly and nodding when we hear about ELG PVIs, GMPD pathways, RWM EXS, and my megacognition, I'm afraid, is just not getting me anywhere on that area. So please, can we have a glossary?
Absolutely, that's noted. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Can we move on to item 6? We've got a report and presentation from Glynis Williams, who's the Director of Safeguarding.
Thank you very much, everyone. So my name is Glynis Williams and I'm the Acting Director of Safeguarding. This feels a bit awkward. Can you hear me okay? Yeah. Okay, so the first thing I want to start with is a bit of context. So again, when we talk about out of borough children, looked after children, what we're talking about are those children and young people under 18-year-olds that are in the care of Trafford Local Authority, where we're placing them outside of the borders of Trafford. On the Trafford footprint, there will be some children that are placed here that are looked after from other authorities. And that's something we're very mindful of as a council, and we have the necessary checks and balances to support and make sure those young people are safe. But actually, for the purposes of today and for this meeting, we're talking about the children that are looked after by Trafford, and they're placed out of borough. And so I've come today to really give you an update on that picture, because we need to monitor the outcomes of this group very closely as an authority. What we know from research is that the further away our young people and children are placed from the local authority, often their outcomes are poorer. So the closer to home, the closer to their communities, and the closer to us we can have this group of young people, the better the outcomes are going to be. So since at the end of September 2018, we had 399 looked after children. Now, the majority of these children are placed in in-house foster carers, or they're placed with their parents under a court order, and that still means that they are a looked after child. And that is really good news. Where we can, we need these children and young people placed in a family environment. Some of our children live in our children's homes, and some of our children live in adoptive placements. We have 26 children living in external residential units. So they are units that are, or children's homes that are, most of them outside of the Trafford footprint as well, and they are not run by Trafford Council. We've got 49 children living in independent fostering carers, so they are private fostering agencies. This figure is slightly higher than we last reported 15 months ago, but that fits with the national trend. So this pie chart just helps you to see at a glance that the good news is the majority of our children are placed in a family-based setting. Again, what we know is when we place children out of borough in residential care, it does cost more money. Inevitably, the costs relating to that care and some of the complexity that those children and young people have mean that it costs more. And again, to provide the update from the last time that Scrutiny Committee had this information, generally overall the costs have gone up since the last time we reported. So this slide just sets out the costs and that slight increase across the board. What I can reassure the committee is that we have really strong monitoring arrangements. We work very carefully and closely to ensure that all of these arrangements are reviewed regularly. We have a weekly placement panel that tracks all of those young people, and we have monthly placement meetings with service managers and the finance team to review those high-cost placements, so that where appropriate, we're supporting the planning to move young people closer to home and to in-house provision. We also have a placements deficiency board that meets monthly, where we strategically manage resources wherever possible. We need to be using them quickly and avoiding any delay. This is just an example of a slide that just sets out the sort of performance data that we now review every month to make sure that we're managing our resources well. What's been a critical part of our strategic priorities the last 12 months is to increase our in-house foster care provision. So there are a number of things that we've done to improve in this area. We've now increased the Trafford fostering allowances in line with the regional rates. We have a flexible and responsive Fostering Plus scheme, and this provides short breaks for our foster carers and for our children on the edge of care, so that we're working with families to keep them together in the community, but providing a bit of respite where that's necessary. We're planning to introduce a specialist fostering scheme that will offer high support and therapeutic approach to caring for children with complex emotional needs. We're refreshing our fostering recruitment materials and are developing our social media presence. We have a Refer the Friends scheme. We've sought fostering friendly status as a council to encourage employees to work and combine fostering together. And we're really targeting support to increase foster care resilience and placement stability. We've enhanced the network of support available to carers by continuing to develop our mentoring scheme, and we have a dedicated family-focused resource for foster carers to support those placements. We've implemented our new procedures for providing financial support to experienced foster carers to extend their accommodation to increase their capacity to provide placements. We've been very lucky being part of Greater Manchester. We've been able to be part of a wider scheme to draw down some innovation money on projects that suit our strategic priorities. For us in Trafford, we have decided to follow a project called No Wrong Door. In many ways, it's not very helpful, that title, because it doesn't really tell you much about the project. But this is a fantastic opportunity where we'll, alongside other authorities in Greater Manchester, we will be improving the outcomes for vulnerable adolescents on the edge of care and provide better support for placement stability and within the family-based setting. What this will mean is that we'll realign and I'll strengthen our existing services, our family-focused team and our Fostering Plus carers and our existing children's home provision. And some of the real challenges we're going to be really tackling with this is really working on a basis that no child is unfosterable. We want all of our children to be able to live in a family-based setting. So we're going to be working really hard to try and make sure that we don't always have a kind of route of a child going into residential care and all that comes with that. So for us, we're going to work really hard to keep young people either in their families or try and provide and support foster placements so those children can stay with foster families. One of the critical elements to the model is creating capacity in the system to manage a crisis. And sometimes we end up where there's an incident that drives a result in long-term decision making. So if there's a crisis on a particular night in a family and a young person comes into care, it's very hard to change the traction on that decision. And what we really want to do is provide enough flexibility and frankly, staff and resources to deal with a crisis out of hours as well, so we can support families and walk with them through this crisis, or walk with those foster carers through a specific incident or some sort of concern, so that we can support and keep those arrangements together, keep that child and young person in that family or in that placement. So, other work that we're doing as part of our transformation programme, we've employed a short-term review and improvement team, and they're reviewing every one of our external placements and making sure that we're offering family-based placements where we can. And our family-focused service works really hard on preventing care episodes and supporting foster carers with where they've got challenging placements. And we've put some particular attention around our 16 plus arrangements. So a lot of our young people, as they move towards independence, they're living in placements in supported accommodation, but they still require a lot of focus and attention and support. So we've done a bit of extra scrutiny around these young people and those arrangements to make sure that we have good quality placements. The role of the commissioning, important progress in this area. Our commissioning team work in partnership with performance to explore what we need to do to hold providers to account. We have a programme of quality assurance visits for all our, in particular, 16 plus providers, and this helps improve standards and outcomes for young people. We are currently in the process of tendering for a new 5-bed care leaver provision, and this will be awarded in the next few months. And we're extending the use of our Forest Court supported accommodation to have an extra bed. And again, this is part of our strategy where we want our young people to live nearer Trafford, and we want to provide more in-house provision. So this is our opportunity to have more focus and control over that. It's really important for us that we manage the market. So we have ongoing meetings with providers to build relationships, securing priority for local foster carers and residential placements, facilitating provider events to secure step-down placements from residential for our young people, offering a different way to work with our providers, and benchmarking costs. Costs are being collated and compared across Greater Manchester at the moment and across the region. And I'm delighted to say, by comparison to other local authorities, Trafford's negotiation skills in securing the most competitive costs are really strong. So you can feel confident that we are getting the best arrangements and the best value where we do need to commission those arrangements. So one of the key bits for us now is to work alongside our other authorities in Greater Manchester. And as a group of authorities, we have devised 5 priority areas. So across Greater Manchester, we're going to be making sure that we have strong fostering services to increase and grow. We're going to keep improving the effectiveness and value for money of placement finding, brokerage systems, securing a residential capacity which is financially sustainable and meets the needs, and achieve a reduction in the use of high cost placements, and addressing the impact of high numbers of inward placements. So we're really working across Greater Manchester and North West to manage the market so that it gives us the best outcomes for us here in Trafford. I can take any questions now.
Questions? Okay. Dan, do you want to start?
Yeah, just wanted to ask a question for my own knowledge, really, about children at the age of 16. Do they have to make a transition from one carer to another? Because it must be a difficult age to make that transition. So I just wanted to know what happens.
Yeah, no, that's a really helpful question. Not at all. And really, when we say sort of 16 plus provision, that's it's often not 16. In fact, at 18 now, we have stay and put arrangements. And if a young person is living with a foster care and it's absolutely right for that young person to stay into adulthood, we support those arrangements. I suppose what I'm making reference to is that supported accommodation isn't regulated in the same way that children's homes are. And generally speaking, from 16, 17, 18, young people can live in unregulated provision. There are checks and balances, of course, around that provision. And one of the things that commissioning work really hard on is across Greater Manchester, making sure that we do have some quality assurance processes in place. But absolutely, we follow the care plan of the young person. And when it's right for them to move on into transition and into their own semi-independent arrangements, we will do it then.
Graham, did you have a question?
Yeah, just sort of three questions, hopefully fairly quick ones, really. Just wanted clarification about, so in terms of the placements with private fostering agencies, in terms of the location of those, they could be potentially within Trafford as well as outside Trafford.
Yes, that's right. And one of the things, I didn't want to put the slide up today because it might identify specific placements, but we map out on a map where those are. So we're really getting a sense of how near they are. But you're right, we will have Trafford, both things. We will have Trafford carers that actually don't live in Trafford. They might live in Manchester or Salford. And then on the Trafford footprint, there will be private fostering agencies that have that are foster carers for those agencies, and they will have children from anywhere in the country living in Trafford.
And so the use of those private limited number of foster placements in terms of that in-house offer, or are there other factors that can drive the use of the private fostering agencies?
Well, in its broadest sense, it's market demand. So, over the years, we have seen the development of more and more private agencies, and wherever possible, we recruit as many of our own foster carers, and we make those arrangements competitive for them to want to come and work for us. But we know the reality is that people make their own choices about who they want to work for. But as a Greater Manchester and as a Northwest region, we're trying to do more, because really we're the commissioners. And if we pull together as a joint commissioning group, we would have far more control over the market.
So just on that, because you were saying about so the cost of the independent fostering agency placements looks like it's sort of 3 times higher than the cost of the in-house foster placement, so it's vast. And then you were saying Trafford's particularly good at sort of getting the most competitive costs. But doesn't that getting the competitive costs, that not just depend on scale? So bigger local authorities are better placed to negotiate better costs, or is there other things going on there that allow you to get a good deal? I can see why doing it at scale across Greater Manchester might then enable you to have more leverage, but I'm just intrigued as to why Trafford is particularly good at that.
Well, there's 2 things wrapped up in there. The issue of the independent fostering agencies is that the way that we always do it is we start with, can we place the child in-house or with their own family? If that isn't possible, that's when we end up with an IFA. And usually with the IFAs, we already know what the costs largely will be. A lot of it is some of the additionality that transport, etc., that might end up being added to that. But there is actually a framework that works out what that should already, at its core level, cost. We often find that IFAs are more able to meet the needs of larger sibling groups. So we don't have an awful lot of in-house foster carers that are registered for 3, 4 or 5 children. And if they are, they've usually already got those children in. But if we suddenly get a big sibling group, our preference is to keep them together. And sometimes it's the IFA that's more able to be agile and make that happen. Sometimes, sadly, we do have to split children, but it's the last resort and it's not something we prefer to do. But sorry, but the other thing you raised was about residential care, and Glynis quite rightly said that when we are placing a child in one of these organisations, it's external home, a children's home, then we're in a position to really try to negotiate the best deal. And I'm going to bring Jo in here, because actually it's the commissioning team that do that work for us of try to get the best price we can, because you are talking up at 3, 4, sometimes even £5,000 a week. So everything you can bring down, then that does help. So I'll bring Jo in.
So the way that we do that really is using a framework, the Northwest framework, so that there's a certain amount of quality checks that goes on before those providers are allowed on that framework. And then we just have a really robust process in place in terms of collecting the details about those young people. And then it's really quite a competitive process, I suppose, and one which will involve negotiation in order to get the best quality and price for that care. So it's just a question of having centralised that function as well, really, so that we actually have some experts that do that kind of day in, day out, rather than it being previously, I guess, dispersed across a lot of So it's expertise that we have developed in-house to do that.
Just quickly on the sort of larger sibling groups, then, is that an area that the council could look into in terms of being able to accommodate larger sibling groups more amongst that kind of in-house fostering offer, and how might we do that?
Yeah, so we're really keen. We advertise. We want to see. We need carers that will take teenagers and take large sibling groups. And again, like I mentioned before, we have this scheme now in terms of creating capacity in your own house, because sometimes the foster carers are willing, they just don't have the space, particularly with the staying put arrangements now. It's right and proper that young person becomes an adult, stays in the home, but of course we lose a bedroom when that happens. But actually that foster care has got the ability to carry on offering very good quality care. Foster carers that can take large sibling groups and can take young people and teenagers.
Can I just ask quickly? I know a couple of years ago there was an issue in attracting Trafford foster carers due to the disparity in payment. And I understand that we addressed that by increasing our offer. Has the uptake improved in Trafford since that? I know it's not, people don't do this sort of thing for the money, but if you can work for a private company and earn twice as much, then human nature would perhaps compel you to do that. So have we had an increase in Trafford carers since?
We have, and we've got well into the late 20s of new carers this financial year, and we've set ourselves some very ambitious targets around recruitment. So yes, we're doing really well on that, and we've really increased our fostering households this year, and we plan to do the same next year.
It's fantastic. Thank you. And can I just be cheeky? And
Sorry,
ask a follow-up?
Councillor Weston, if
go
I
on.
can just clarify. The cost to us of sending a child to an IFA are significantly more than the payments that we make to our own foster carers. But actually, the IFA foster carers don't get that full amount. The agency takes a good percentage of it. So the foster carers aren't necessarily getting significantly more money, but they have the choice as to who they want to be their employer, really. And we have to try and make ourselves the employer of choice.
Okay. Can I just ask, as an incidental, we've made the council fostering friendly status. Has any employees actually taken us up on that?
That's a good question, actually. I don't have my fostering manager here, but I can find out for you.
Be interesting.
I would. I'll let you know.
Well, it is on the same point, really, because I think it is a crucial point, because when you look at the cost between independent foster agency and in-house, it is massive. And clearly there will be a big profit being made by the independent fostering agency. We're obviously not for profit. So I think if we can match the wages of people, the salaries that they get, then that is part. But I think the other part is, how do we go about recruiting, and how long does it actually take to recruit, and what are the barriers for recruiting? Because I think we need to get to the bottom of all of those issues, really, to enable us to to progress, because if we can do it in house, it will probably be a better service, and it will be a lot cheaper. That money is scarce, so we've got to consider that. So I suppose I need to understand the recruitment process, and how long that actually takes from somebody initially coming forward and saying, yes, I'm interested. How long does it normally take on average?
I don't know the exact time, but I believe it's about 16 weeks, because what we have to do is work with the carers to understand the full extent of the role. So we have a stage one that goes through a group work process, where we have the opportunity to share information about what to expect, because some people, we need to talk to them about what type of fostering do you want to do? Do you want to do short term, young children, adolescents, or do you want to do long term? And then the second part of the assessment is when you're allocated a key worker, and you go into the full process of the assessment. But the other thing I'd like to say is, actually, a lot of the feedback from foster carers, it isn't just about the money. It's about being part of an organisation where they feel they've got the trust in the role that they're doing, and often they do prefer to come to council authorities, because the child and the child social worker are within the same organisation, and often the fact that the child social worker can walk over to the supervising social worker, who is the person who supports the foster carer, actually makes a huge amount of difference. So sometimes it's not just about the actual amount of money, it's the type of training, support and development that we offer the carers. The extra resources into this from our transformation fund.
I would have thought it would have been the place of choice, rather than an independent fostering agency. But that's, I don't know a great deal about it, but that's what I would have imagined, that it would have been place of choice. I would be interested to know how many people who actually come forward as new foster carers are rejected, and on what grounds.
Yeah, absolutely. We can get you that data. I would say it's often a process. Really, sometimes it's a mutual understanding that actually I thought this role would be this, and it's not quite what I thought it would be. I think the other thing that's a little bit of a complication is we have foster carers that come forward because they want to foster. But then we have a number of looked after children that, through the process of making decisions about permanent decisions for those children, their connected family members come forward and they become foster carers. So again, we will be. We can find you that data, but of course we have a number of foster carers that are connected family members to the looked after children as well. So I can get you that data though.
Could I just ask a question about the secure accommodation? The young people are only placed in secure accommodation, usually for their own safety. And I notice we don't have any at the moment. Nationally, there isn't enough accommodation for those young people that need it. Are Greater Manchester as a whole looking to provide any as a source for each of the 10 authorities?
So you're right. There is a national shortage of secure accommodation. It is a national run scheme, for want of a better word, and actually Hampshire host those arrangements. So they manage the waiting list and they work on any capacity issues. And they are talking with regions like Greater Manchester to make sure we've got enough capacity within our region.
But what I will say, Councillor Blackburn, is that Greater Manchester has looked at the issue of whether it should build its own secure accommodation. And actually, they made a decision at this point in time to pull away from that and say that what we should be doing as a whole system is trying to find ways to avoid children having to go into secure, really. And so this is why we've been able to access all this funding around things like No Wrong Door and Achieving Change Together, where we can really work with the type of young people who ultimately would end up in secure. Because actually secure doesn't really help children, it just contains them for a period of time. And sometimes they often come out worse than they went in. And it's not, it really is a last resort, desperate thing to do. And it's something that, we all feel a sense of failure if we have to do it. So we try to avoid it. So Greater Manchester has considered it. But at this point in time, they would rather put their energy into prevention rather than, because if you build it, they will come kind of bit, so try not to build it.
Just ask, will the fostering allowances be reviewed on an annual basis in the future so that decisions don't sort of have to be made on the back foot?
May not be annual, but we definitely will be reviewing them in line with the rest of Greater Manchester, so that we don't fall back into the sort of the bottom quartile again, that we're always somewhere in the middle or getting towards the top if we can.
One question that's been bothering me for some time now. There's a line on page 31 of the report addressing the impact of high numbers of inward placements. Now, I'm reading that to say that we place some of our young people out of borough, but we accept people from out of borough into borough. And I just wondered if we have a couple of examples of what drives the decision to place someone out of borough or to accept somebody from out of borough into borough. What sort of criteria do we apply, especially as the cost of placing people out of borough would pay for the school, never mind some sort of out of borough placement. So why do we do it? Why do we have to do it? And is there a balance?
So our starting point is always, first of all, does the child need to be in care? What can we do to stop and avoid that young person or reduce the need for that young person to come into care? Once we've established that that child must come into care and must leave wherever they currently are, we will try and place them as close to home and to their communities as possible. And we will always, always, always try and place them in a family-based environment. our preferred choice is fostering, our in-house fostering carers, because we know them and they will be local. But again, when they're full and we can't get the match, because the matching is critical here, we then have to then rely on the external market. So once we've exhausted our internal resources, we have to go and we have to ask and see if there's a independent fostering agency that will have that child. Again, part of the matching criteria will be that they are near their school, that they are still near their home and their communities. And wherever possible, we will try and achieve that. But the reality is that there aren't enough places for children. So we end up, often going into the wider part of Greater Manchester, and sometimes in exceptional circumstances into the northwest. But wherever possible, we try and avoid that. And certainly if we have to make those sort of emergency arrangements, we'll do our level best within a timely manner to bring them back closer to home.
So we don't have within the borough now anyone who's been placed in the borough from outside.
We do. So like I said at the start, there will be other authorities that will place children on the Trafford footprint in this area from those authorities. And they won't be using our provision, but they will be placing them in independent fostering agency placements or residential homes that are on our patch.
There are no more questions. Thank you very much. Can we move on to agenda item 7, which are the commissioning intentions for children? And we have Rebecca and Joe from the commissioning service.
Thank you and good evening. I'm Rebecca Domain. I'm part of the commissioning team at Trafford Clinical Commissioning Group. My colleague Joe, part of the commissioning team here at the local authority. But I thought it helpful just to say that this evening we're both here to represent the emerging Integrated Commissioning Directorate in Trafford. And that Integrated Commissioning Directorate is actually made up of 4 teams. So that includes the Health Commissioning Team, the All Age Commissioning Team, Public Health and Performance and Quality Improvement. And that's under the accountability of Sarah Radcliffe, who many of you will know, who's the Corporate Director of Commissioning. There's about 100 individuals across that Integrated Commissioning Directorate, and we commission for children, adults, physical and mental health. And what that Integrated Commissioning Directorate allows for is much closer working between the teams, and we see that as a real opportunity, which will only be improved as the CCG commissioning team move over to the Town Hall as well. Joe and I are very excited about that in terms of the opportunities that brings. We have developed a set of shared commissioning intentions for 1920, and we've got a set of shared commissioning principles. So the direction of travel is very much to improve the governance, improve the decision making, reduce duplication and look for real opportunities for improvement. So in terms of children's commissioning, the Children's Commissioner sits within the All Age Directorate at the moment and has line management through Joe, but now has a direct report through me into the CCG and sits as part of our commissioning management team. So we're hoping we will see some improvements in how we jointly commission, because the children's commissioning is delegated through the CCG to the council through a Section 75 agreement. So that's just helpful context, I hope, in terms of where we are as a commissioning team. And we've been asked for a report tonight on the commissioning intentions for children from a health perspective. So the attached report, which hopefully you've all read, summarises the commissioning intentions around wider children's mental health provision, including third sector, healthy young minds provision, which is the CAMS service, and children's community services as well. So we've summarised those for tonight. If there are specific questions or any areas or any services that you want as a committee to have some further information on, or with our provider colleagues as well, and discuss those in detail, but we will answer questions as best we can. Before I hand over to Joe, who's just going to pick some of the headlines from the paper, just a couple of updates since the report was published. So firstly, you'll be aware that the NHS has published its 10-year plan over the last week or so. And for us, again, that's a real opportunity. Everything within that plan is really supportive of our vision as a commissioning directorate for Trafford as a place. And if you have read it, it's quite long, you might not have done, but key headlines: absolute focus on children and young people, and particularly children and young people's mental health. So we see that, as I say, as a real opportunity, and we'll be expecting to work with the Greater Manchester Partnership on the investment and the plans that we can help to deliver that plan. The second update I just wanted to give, and many of you will be aware of this, we've been undergoing a procurement exercise around our community services provider over the last few months or so, and it was announced at the beginning of last week that our new community service provider will be Manchester Foundation Trust. Again, we see this as a real opportunity, but at the moment I think it's just worth noting for committee that the position at the moment with that is that we are now undergoing a period of due diligence as we transition from one provider to the other. That's being held account to a community transition board, an exec level board, which includes representation from NHS England and NHS Improvement. So it's very exec level to really manage that transition into the new provider from April. What that means is that any significant service changes, there might be some slight delay to implementation as we go through that period of due diligence, but that's the right thing to do. But what it doesn't stop is the ability to look at the key performance areas and the service redesign that we might need to happen so that we can implement it when the new provider is ready to implement. So I just thought it was helpful to kind of state that at this time. So that's kind of some background, and I'll hand over to Jo.
Thank you. Okay, so the first thing to say probably is that I haven't written this report. It has been written by the person that works for me, Claire Ball. So she's the one with all of the detailed knowledge around this, but I will do my best to explain some of these services and take any questions at the end. So to begin with then, children's mental health and the wider projects and services. The biggest piece of work we have on at the moment is around the local transformation plan, or the LTP, as it's often referred to. It was first written in 2015 and it's been updated twice then. It's due a refresh now for a third time. So this plan kind of outlines, it's a massive plan, but there's kind of 5 main priorities within that. And it's aiming to promote resilience, prevention and early intervention, improve access to effective support, caring for our most vulnerable, accountability and transparency, and shaping the workforce. And some of the things that I'll be talking about now will fit into each of those priorities. So the National and Greater Manchester access and waiting time targets. So as you will probably be aware, there's a national target that's been set by NHS England that is designed to increase the number of children and young people receiving treatment from community mental health services. And the report goes on to describe some targets that we have in terms of accessing these services and treatment, and also waiting time targets. At the moment, we're not hitting those targets. However, we want to really provide a bit of reassurance here that some of the reasons that we're not hitting those targets is around some issues for data flow. And I know that Claire has been telling me that those issues are now resolved, so that we have some of the community services data will be flowing into that data flow. So hopefully those figures will be improving. And secondly, as the report says, there's some recruitment to posts that needed to happen. There was a large number of vacancies within that service. And actually, at the time of writing the report, that there were vacancies, but that has now been resolved. So they have been recruited too. The All-Age Rapid Assessment Interface Discharge, or the RAID. This is quite an exciting project because we have a RAID for adults at the moment, but we are working to make this an all-age service. So RAID supports people who present in accident and emergency with a mental health crisis. And we're really pleased to say that over the next few months, we will be developing this to be for 16 plus as well. And really the outcome of that will be that there will be sort of access to mental health services 24 hours a day, 7 days a week as well. So it's an exciting development. In terms of transforming care, as part of national legislation, so we need to start carrying out, or we have started to carry out, care, education and treatment reviews, or CETRs as they're sometimes referred to. So these are for young people with learning disabilities or autism, and they're identified as potentially being admitted to a specialist learning disability or mental health inpatient setting. There is a really robust process in terms of managing these CETRs, and there's a dynamic risk register that's been set up, which makes sure that we identify those people who are at risk and to work with those people to review their care, education and treatment. There's lots more details on here about that, but I won't go into there. Training is also a really positive story. Again, as part of Trafford's 1819 workforce plan, there's been a variety of training that's recently taken place, including sessions on anxiety, self-harm and depression. There's been a really positive response to this training, and it's been had full attendance and attendees are rating the training on average of 4.5 out of 5. In terms of the people it's been aimed at, it's professionals who are involved in supporting young people's mental health and well-being at the lower end of the need. So school nurses, early help workers, school staff. The idea behind this is that the staff will have expressed that they currently lack mental health skills in this area, for example, around anxiety, and that the training then prevents professionals referring straight to a specialist services when it may not be a specialised need. The autism and social communication pathway. So recently we have launched a new pathway to replace what was previously known as thank you. It's just like slipped my mind. So the neurodevelopmental pathway. This encourages schools to identify children with suspected autism or social communication issues and address any learning and training needs and put the appropriate behaviour strategies in place based on the child's needs and without waiting for formal diagnosis. So there is a real emphasis about really trying to meet the needs before necessarily a diagnosis has got to be made, as we know that's quite a long process. There are some teething problems with that. There is a waiting list, and as we've changed over to that new pathway, ultimately there is now quite a large waiting list for people to be seen. But the positive news on that is that there is also some money that's been allocated, which will look at trying to address that waiting list. Indeed, I was at a meeting earlier on today, and we were looking at how that could be, the waiting list could be cleared within 12 months. So that's positive news there. Similarly, there's been some development recently around the attention deficit hyperactivity disorder pathway. So this has been in place for around about a year now, and we're just starting to understand or trying to do a review really about monitoring how the implementation of that pathway is going and getting some feedback from parents and young people about that. There has been a survey that's been recently completed and the results are being analysed at the moment. So I think it's really positive in terms of those pathways that are showing that we are sort of doing that developmental work about trying to change things and improve things. There are barriers again around waiting lists, but we're doing our best to address some of those and being really proactive and having conversations with providers and about trying to reduce the waiting times. We're also really have tried to make sure that we bring sort of parents into the development of these, and it's sort of a co-productive, as much as a co-productive way as we can. And we're working on trying to improve that as well over the, as we get close, as we work with parents more. But there's also probably a need to improve communication to parents as well, and would like to sort of acknowledge that. The next paragraph talks about early help services. So we have 42nd Street, Couth and Trafford Sunrise. So these supporting children and young people with mental health. Again, they've been extremely popular and therefore have, again, attracted, we're getting waiting lists on some of these services, 42nd Street and Just Psychology. Couth is more of an online offer, so we're being able to sort of manage waiting times a bit easier there, or it's not so much of an issue. And just, I suppose, just wanted to highlight really that we're working really closely with these providers about how we do change the way that we deliver these services. So, for example, we have here 42nd Street. They've moved away from having all assessments face to face and are now carrying out these over the phone. Initial feedback to this has been really positive because parents and young people don't have to wait so long. But we'll continue to monitor this and to see the impact on waiting times. So it's just an example of how there's ongoing dialogue with these providers to see how we can do things differently in order to reduce waiting times. But there is, again, also positively funding that's been identified through Greater Manchester Health and Social Care Partnership that will look to try and really rectify the waiting list issues, so that we can work co-productively again with the providers in order to make sure that we work with them to find the best solution for reducing the waiting list, and that is sustainable in the longer term. Okay, children's mental health, or Healthy Young Minds, or there's another acronym there, CAMS, Children's Adolescents Mental Health Service. So Healthy Young Minds provides a service for children and young people in Trafford who are at risk of developing or have developed a significant mental health problem. It's a multidisciplinary team that support around a variety of issues, including attachment disorders, psychotic symptoms, anxiety disorders, eating disorders, depression, and self-harm. We have done a significant amount of work at a Greater Manchester level that is developing a CAMS service specification. So, we're heavily involved in that GM agenda. So the idea of developing that overarching GM specification is that it tries to standardise CAMS services across Greater Manchester and reduce that kind of postcode lottery around the different services you might experience in different authorities. Part of that service specification is a section that basically means we can sort of say what we definitely need within Trafford. Within that, it's called a Section 11. So we're working with Healthy Young Minds around the development of that section at the moment. There are some challenges with that Greater Manchester specification as well, and it's clear that Trafford are not yet meeting some of these requirements. So, for example, to operate Monday to Friday, 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. by 2021, and a workforce target of 45.9 whole-time equivalents. So the Children's Commission has been working with the service to undertake a demand and capacity exercise, and it has identified a gap of 5.8 whole-time equivalents, and we're working with CCG to make sure that we get the funding in order to close that gap and to meet the specifications there. There will also still be a Trafford specification for CAMS, so they will have kind of two sets of specifications to work to. Oh, done that one. Turn the page. The next section is on eating disorders. We currently commission a community eating disorders service, and that's done on a cluster basis with Stockport, Tameside and Glossop. So this provides a bit of an interesting dynamic with us moving providers to MFT. But just to say really that, there are some issues across different contracts within the current overarching Pennine contract, but it will be managed through the Programme Management Office within the CCG and really would be managing those risks going forward. So clearly something will have to happen going forward to make sure that we can protect this service, that it remains in place. Because if we pull out of that contract, that will then put at risk the service for Glossop and Stockport. The performance data there around that service are really good, so it shows that I think its section is on perinatal, parents and infant mental health. So in terms of commissioning here, we've commenced mapping the existing community perinatal offer as we move towards the development of an integrated parents and infant mental health pathway, which will be aligned to something called the Thrive model, which I won't go into depth today. It's been identified that there is a gap in Trafford, really, that we don't have an early attachment service. So again, this is quite an exciting development that we will be looking to have the funding approved to start developing some of this early attachment service. And it is really important. I think we've mentioned a couple of times the adverse childhood experiences, the ACEs, and this service will be really key in identifying those children and parents, I suppose, that are at risk of experiencing adverse childhood experiences and making sure that we address those as early as possible. So as well as the sort of key perinatal posts that will be going into the Healthy Young Minds service, there's also Home Start, which we've commissioned. So they're a voluntary sector organisation, and they've been commissioned jointly by Trafford and Salford, and also actually match funded by Trafford Housing Trust to deliver a 2-year parent and infant mental health project known as Baby Bond, and it's for pregnant women and families with an infant under the age of 2 in Trafford and Salford. So they will really be going out and trying to identify those children and families where they think there is going to be an issue of attachment, and putting in place some interventions to help those families. And finally, this section around children's community health services. There's the children's community nursing service, community paediatrics. It's not an awful lot to highlight there, so it's just the information within the report anyway. And there's just really, in terms of the community paediatric service, there's just an insurance here around the designated medical officer role, which is required to support the SEND agenda, the SEN and disability, special educational needs and disability agenda. So we have the assurance in place there that role is now being carried out.
The DCO.
As a
designated
medical officer.
No, we've not got a DMO. Sorry.
Oh, right.
Sorry, we haven't got a DMO, but we've got a DCO, so we've got a nurse covering it on a part-time basis for now.
That's a typo within that report, then we'll just need to change that. Okay. Speech and language therapy. Just to highlight here that we've done a lot of work, again involving parent or all kind of stakeholders within this service, about developing a new service specification, which is joint with education as well, and that's due to be signed off. So there is also an issue around waiting lists for speech and language therapy, but again, there's ongoing dialogue about how we can improve that. Waiting times do continue to be high. There's 4 people waiting over 18 weeks in November. However, that was a reduction on August and September, when it was 9 and 10 respectively. So the service is due to produce a report on how the new pathways are going and any areas of learning that can be implemented regarding the waiting times. Children's Learning Disability Nursing Team and Trafford Early Development Service. This is actually already a MFT service, interestingly. So again, there's just to note the report there. Okay, I'm just going to go on to the final 2 services on the last page. So Children's Weight Management Service and Health Visiting and School Nursing. And I think just to highlight Rebecca's point really previously, so both of these services, we have carried out some extensive reviews, and we have some really great ideas about how we do want to change those. However, due to sort of new contract coming in place, that they kind of will be on hold really until we go through that process of due diligence. And the Health Visiting and School Nursing Service, I know especially the Health Visiting and School Nursing Service, that report will be available shortly. But as I say, it is kind of held up within that whole contract management sort of arena. And that's it.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Just before I open this up to questions, would it be possible to give us some sort of figures at some point? And I appreciate you might not have these available. I'm very concerned that waiting lists were mentioned in several of these pathways. Could we get a snapshot of how many children are on these pathways?
Yeah.
And how many are waiting? That concerns me deeply.
We can, absolutely.
I mean, 12 you did mention 12 months on the autism and social communication pathway. That's an awful long time in a child's development. 12
It
months.
is, yeah. We can certainly, delve deeper into these figures, or into the waiting list and so on. Yeah, for
it would
next
be
time.
helpful if we could get some figures around that. But thank you both. Are there any questions?
I'll try and be really quick because we've had a lot of information there to take in. Section 1.5, the training. Who delivers the training? I think it was to school nurses and people on anxiety, self-harm and depression. Is that delivered by the CAMHS professionals?
I'm not sure. I'd have to take that back and answer that.
Thank you.
Get that for you.
Can I ask a couple more? Is that okay? The autism and social communication pathway. I've had some parents express concern about how this actually works, because what they appear to think is that SENCOs will be referring for the diagnostic pathway rather than the medical professionals. Is there some confusion there? Or I know you said that it's early intervention with the SENCOs and doing the what's it called? You know, the escalate. What do they call it? Can't remember what the word is. Is it on here? Where the SENCOs are trying to get the kids before they get the diagnosis. So does that happen? So is it the SENCOs that are referring?
So the SENCOs will be trained in. They will become kind of the lead professional within that case, I think, because it's acknowledged that they will know that young person the best. If the SENCO is not the best person, then an alternative lead professional would be identified.
It's just that I've seen a document about this, and it was quite unclear to me, because it did look like, and it said something like GPs can refer in exceptional circumstances, but I didn't see any mention of paediatricians. It's just that, because obviously SENCOs are very limited in their training of what is, autism, and I've got quite a few concerns about that myself.
Okay.
So is the question there clarity on the referral process?
Yeah,
and who can refer?
just who can refer.
That's fine. We'll take that as an action.
Thank you.
Apologies, we won't be as close to the detail as we need to be to, but we'll take these as an absolute
I understand
action.
that. Just the other thing I want to say is the early help services. That I was really positive, and it's good. And I think there was something again about the waiting list for that, which is a shame. But just on the waiting list, which you mentioned, do we class a waiting list as you're on a waiting list, then you get an appointment and you see somebody, and then sometimes you have to wait again? Or is it waiting list to actually getting in the system properly and having whatever you get?
So that varies dependent on the service, actually, which is a shame. So we've got some services where waiting times are based on referral to contact for an appointment, and some that are then, like you said, there's then almost a second waiting list. So when we provide the information as requested on the numbers, we'll also clarify the definition of the wait as well, because it will vary between services, and that's across adults, children, which is not a great position really, but we'll include that definition as well if that's helpful.
Yeah. The other thing, the speech therapy, I know you said that they're due to produce a report on how what they've changed it to is going. Would we be able to have sight of that report when it's out, please?
I think so, yes, that'll be fine. Well, we can report back in terms of the outcomes of that, certainly.
Does anybody else have any questions? Graham?
Yeah, my question was just in terms of the commissioning of these services, is it done in this report? Obviously, it's good to have the detail about the individual specific services, but I would have liked to have seen some information about how you're taking into account wider agendas when commissioning services. So thinking about, the quality of work, etc., kind of the wider impact that we can have through commissioning and procurement.
We'd be happy to do that. I think just a comment on, in terms of the brief that we had to produce this report, there was not a lot of detail. So I think I understand that that we're going to be working on that next time to make sure that we have a fuller brief to answer some of those questions.
Can I just respond to your specific query though? So I think to answer your question, a lot of these services that we talked about, the commissioning of them is fairly, I don't want to say historic, that's the wrong word, but we're working to a lot of specifications that have been in the contract for quite a long time and haven't really had the opportunity to be reviewed and redesigned as we'd like to. The information I kind of summarised at the beginning in terms of the opportunities around an integrated commissioning directorate means that the refreshed commissioning strategy that we're writing for Trafford, which is based on Trafford Place, Trafford people, population needs, brings the opportunity for looking at all those wider determinants and links to the place-based team here and the stronger communities board. So I think our future commissioning strategy and the opportunity with a new provider will absolutely bring in all of that wider, but I think it's fair to say that that's possibly not how some of these services have been commissioned in the past. So the commissioning strategy is in development at the moment, of course, aligned to the NHS long-term plan and all the other priorities. So I hope when that's ready to be brought to scrutiny to get your input, you'll see that we do talk about those wider system factors and influences.
Sorry, can I just answer the social value question as well? So there will be some contracts in there that have absolutely gone through. We are getting sort of social value out of those contracts as well. The Home Start Baby Bond one is an absolutely great example of how they've used match funding as well in order to the fact that they've got our contract, they've used match funding in order to add real value to that contract. And similarly, 42nd Street and Just Psychology, they all will have gone through a process whereby they have to have answered questions around social value, and we will build that into the contract monitoring going forward as well.
So is that a standard process that's gone through in each instance of commissioning a service, or it sounds like there might be differences in different circumstances?
It is. So these aren't NHS providers. So obviously all of the other contracts that are tied up within that big NHS contract have been slightly different, but they will be coming over to the council way of commissioning things.
John, do you want to?
One thing that I noticed when reading through this report earlier was the fact that all these new developments are targeted towards the very early stages of diagnosis, or appear to be. I may be misreading it. And we've already heard the phrase this evening, if you build it, they will come. My concern, and please tell me if I'm wrong to have this concern, is that with this new system and all the new tools that we're putting in place, we're going to do really well at identifying a much higher proportion of young people with mental health needs. But what about the ones we already know about, who have been in a system which looks as though it wasn't quite doing what we'd like it to have done? Are people with existing diagnoses going to suffer as a result of this concentration on the new and pulling in the new customers?
A good question. Hopefully not. No, there will be investment in a whole range of services, and one I did mention the I Thrive model within the paper, and that model around a young person being at the centre and to be thriving. They needed a variety of services there, perhaps at different points. So we're trying to develop services around that Thrive model. So if I just go in a little bit more detail, that's about sometimes just being able to get advice. So we have all of the early help services, health visiting, school nursing, talk shop and services around there about young people being able to get advice, getting help, 42nd Street, Couth, Just Psychology, about being there to be able to help people through some of the lower, less complex or early mental health problems, to provide more help for people. And there's also something around getting support at times of risk. And I've again mentioned within those services about us developing the all-age RAID. So it's trying to move away from kind of a linear pathway through services, but developing a whole range of services to be able to meet the needs of young people.
I think just to add to that as well, Joe, I think in terms of kind of existing caseload and as people move through a pathway, move through services, I think we've got to be a little bit more creative in terms of what we look at as support for those people. So there'll always be potentially a specialist need and a medical need, a clinical need, but then we've got to think about the wider community assets, social value that you've talked about, and what else we can do to support patients who have got an existing diagnosis. It's looking at our workforce as well and what we can do with general practitioners and social workers to help those people. And I think the other thing we need to consider, because you're right to make the point about targeting people at an early stage of diagnosis, but what we've probably not covered in this paper, and again it's really clear in the long-term plan, is the continued focus on the person and not the patient. So actually before diagnosis, how do we move into a much more preventative agenda as well, and what's our role as a commissioning director in prevention as well as diagnosis and then intervention, and that's probably something that we need to focus on a lot more.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that. And I promise that's the end of my really serious questioning. Why 42nd Street? Where on earth did that name come from? I know 42nd Street. I've been on 42nd Street. I've eaten on 42nd Street, but I've got no idea what its connection with mental health is.
No comment. I've no idea, but I will. I will endeavour to find out, though. They are an excellent organisation, though, and delivering really good. Yeah. Okay.
Linda.
Hello, can I just ask, Children's Weight Management Service, I think everybody has concerns about the issues that a lot of young people have with weight and health, and I think statistics indicates how much of a change between the end of Key Stage 1 and the end of Key Stage 2, and I don't feel that issues are being sort of met or dealt with adequately from the details in the report. Can you sort of make me feel a little easier about what's going to happen in the future?
I think, first of all, we acknowledge those concerns, and I think commissioners share some of the concerns around the current Children's Weight Management Service, which is why it was subject to quite a comprehensive review in, was it 2017? In terms of giving you assurances about the future, I think with, like the other provider, community services, whilst there is going to be some pause in the implementation of any significant change, I think the findings of that review have given us a real wealth of information in terms of an improved service offer. So the piece of work around the redesign can happen so that we're ready to have a revised specification, which includes all those things I've talked about in terms of prevention and as well as intervention, ready to recommission through the new provider. So your concerns are shared and are shared by commissioners, and that's one of the priority services for redesign and recommission.
Could I ask, could you come back to us in a few months just to update us on sort of any progression?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Sorry, can I just comment as well? So that the Children's Weight Management Service is only for those very overweight in terms of the 98th percentile or above. So there's a whole raft of, as Rebecca was alluding to, the earlier prevention sort of stuff, which I believe public health would love to probably come and talk to you about as well. Okay.
Thank you very much. You're more than welcome to stay to the end of the meeting, but if you'd prefer to leave, I'm sure. Oh, well, thank you so much for joining us. Okay. If we can get the technology sorted, I'm going to ask Sarah Butters to give us an overview of the Family Information Service.
Okay, hi, I'm Sarah Butters. I'm the Early Years Service Manager, and I also manage the Family Information slides, and that's what I'm going to go through. So the Family Information Service, there are a range of statutory duties placed on the local authority to provide information and assistance to parents, prospective parents and families. So we have duties within the Childcare Act, duties specifically in relation to special educational needs and disabilities within the Children and Families Act. And so it's the Family Information Service which meets these duties. It's a free service and it's a universal service, so it's available to everybody, and it signposts families to local activities and support that's available in our area. So it's a key element of the universal early help offer. So there's a range of ways which the service provides information. Information is available online through the Trafford directory. So we know that not everybody can access online information, but for those families that are able to self-serve, that's the mechanism that we would expect them to do that through. We also have frontline professionals that work with families, or perhaps families that aren't IT literate, and they can support them to access the information within the Trafford directory as well. We provide information through social media. So there's around 2,000 followers on Twitter and about 1,600 Facebook likes on the Family Information Service page. And then in terms of other ways people can access information, we have a telephone helpline Monday to Friday during office hours. So we get a lot of specific inquiries from people through there. And then a really valuable element of the service is the outreach service. So we have a team of Family Information Service outreach workers, and they are out in the community getting information and advice out to people. So they attend community groups and events, and they work in partnership with local services. Within the team, we have community language speakers, which is really vital to getting information out, especially in the north of the borough. So the outreach service is a targeted service, and there's a range of target groups. So we focus on more vulnerable children and families, young parents, disabled children and young people, and a range of other target groups there. We rely quite heavily on a sort of cascade model. So a lot of the work that the Family Information Service do is around raising awareness with other services that work directly with families to make sure that families are aware of the resource that's there and available to them. We have some enhanced services as well. So this is extra help for families. We have a childcare brokerage service, which is available to support families to find a suitable early education or childcare place for their child. It's usually parents of disabled children that access that service, but it is available for anybody who is struggling to find suitable care to meet their needs. And then we have a special educational needs and disability local offer advisor. So they're offering an enhanced service to families who have a child or young person with SEND, and I'll talk about that a little bit later on down the slides. So this slide here just gives you a bit of a sense of the number of people which the service engages with over the year. So I've split it into the outreach service, which is the first pie chart. So over the last year, the outreach service attended 460 sessions out in the community. And through those sessions, they engaged with nearly 7,500 people. The vast majority of the people that they engage with are parents or parent carers. 11% of that engagement was with professionals. So that's the work that we do, raising awareness of the service so they can promote it to families. And then 3% of the work was with employers. So we do have a target sort of work out with large employers so they can support their employees to access suitable childcare. The second pie chart shows the contacts for the office-based services. So there's 1,732 inquiries to the office-based services. The majority of those are through the telephone helpline. So 87% through the phone helpline, 12% via email, and then a small 1% of inquiries coming through social media. So in total, that's 9,180 contacts to the service over the year. The table on the right-hand side just highlights the main reason for people contacting or the service, or the main type of information that we provide to them. So there's a column for outreach service, a column for the office-based services. So you can see that at the top of that table there, it's people looking for information about childcare and early education. And I think this strongly links to what we were talking about before with the school readiness agenda. So the family information service, a significant impact from the family information service is that high take-up of early education places. So those outreach teams support families in the community to do an online application, find a place, and kind of do that that supportive and hand-holding. Whilst the teams are out and about doing outreach, 29% of people are really interested in the activities and the local support groups that are out in the local community. And then you can see there's a difference. So people don't tend to contact our office-based services about that, but if they're out and about, that's obviously of interest to them. And then 11% of the work that's done out in the communities is people interested in the early help hubs and just generally the early help services which are available. And then there's much smaller percentages for the other categories. You can see that when we look at special educational needs and disability, 3% of the outreach contacts are around SEND and 4% of the office-based contacts. Okay, the next slide is about the Trafford Directory. So that's the website. The Trafford Directory, it's the single online platform that's promoted locally. So we promote it for people to access information and advice. It provides information about all age services, local activities, and also support. So there's different types of content. There's service directory content, which talks like the services that are available. It covers a wide range of services. So it's our internal services, council and health services. It's our commissioned services, but it's also services provided by voluntary and community sector provision. And that includes things, you know, it could be things like the local football club that's run by a parent volunteer on the field. So we've got a real wide range of things that are on the service directory. Browse Aloud is software which is embedded, which supports translation of the web content into different languages. And it also does screen reading options. So that's for improved accessibility. We've had some really good feedback about the translation element of the Browse Aloud software, especially out in the north where it's very difficult to communicate sometimes with people who have English as an additional language. So within the Trafford Directory, the content is structured into 5 key areas. So we have children and families, young people, adults and older people, and then the special educational needs and disability local offer. And then the 5th area is the council's corporate event, like not corporate events, but it's an events guide that we use as the council's events guide. Some facts and figures there. So we've got around 1,800 service listings, around 544 Ofsted registered early years listings. And then adding to those service listings, we've got the 240 advice and guidance pages. So that's where you get the more detailed information about how to access support. One of the ways that the directory, we keep it up to date, because it's obviously quite a big information source, is we ask individual services to log in and update their own listings. So we've got 2,130 registered users of the site. And then any content which they update on the site goes through a moderation process, which is managed by the Family Information Service. The site is well used. So in terms of the number of users, we have on average 10,500 users of the website per month, which equates to 126,000 users over the year. And then when we look at page views, we're close to sort of 50,000 page views a month, over 500,000 page views a year. So it is well used. So when we think about the special educational needs and disability local offer, we have to publish information about what's on offer locally for children and young people aged 0 to 25 who've got SEND. So that includes information about the education, health and social care services, the local support. A big thing about the local offer is it's not just a directory of services. What's really important is that focus on access. So how people actually access the support, who's eligible for the support, making sure people are fully aware of what they can tap into. So we have a role on the team called the SEND Local Offer Advisor, and they're there supporting families to access activities which would be suitable to meet their child's needs. So that's like the extra help that's available for SEND families. To access that service, families or professionals who are already working with families would make a referral through to the multi-agency referral and assessment team. And then it gets triaged by the complex needs social care team. And for the lower level needs, that then will be picked up by the SEND Local Offer Advisor. So the type of support available there is the local offer advisor might go and visit a family in the home and sort of provide information to them about the support they could access. A key part of the local offer is around feedback from parents and young people about the services that are on offer and the support on offer. So there's two parts to this really. One part is about making sure that users really feed into the design of the website, how the information is presented, not just the website, but the other ways people can get information. And the other part of it is about what people think about the services that are actually So we have a SEND communication and engagement group, and that's a working group of the SEND board. And that group is responsible really for all the sorts of engagement work with parents and young people and developing the local offer and the Trafford Directory website. We've got some key partners there, like the Parent and Young People Partnership Service, which is the independent SEND information service in Trafford, Trafford Parent Forum, and also the young people themselves that we tend to do partnership work through schools and things like that, and with the Children's Rights Officer. So in terms of Family Information Services role there, that's a coordination role in making sure that we're getting that engagement. This is the last slide that I've got, and this was really just to give a couple of examples of some of the engagement projects which have happened in relation to SEND. So one of the things we did is we did a survey to try and get a baseline of how involved young people feel in terms of their EHC plan or the annual review for their education, health and care plan. So we surveyed around 200 young people that were in secondary education or upwards, so sort of year 7 onwards. And I'll just give you a couple of the highlights from that. So we wanted to try and get a baseline so that we can monitor any future progress against it. So of that baseline survey, 53% of young people use the happy face. So there's like a happy face, a neutral face or a sad face. 53% had the happy face with regards to how they found their annual review, and 66% used the happy face to say they thought they felt listened to through the EHC and the annual review process. So we've now implemented a scheme where we'll be capturing feedback routinely after every annual review and as people go through a new EHC needs assessment process, which could result in an EHC plan. And what we're hoping to see is we want to, you know, the idea is that we'll be able to measure some progress there in terms of the involvement of young people. Another way that we engage young people is through the annual Let's Talk SEND conference. That's currently being co-produced this year by Manor Academy, which is one of our secondary special schools. So the young people themselves are planning and will be delivering that conference for other young people. And it's aimed at young people in Trafford who have an EHC plan. We have a termly linked newsletter, which is aimed at parents and carers of families with SEND. And that's one of the key ways that we communicate what's going on with families. And a couple of other pieces of work that have been completed recently. We're co-producing a parent guide to the SEND graduated approach, and that's a guide to the whole system. And we're working with Trafford Parent Forum and a group of parents to get a final version of this. And the idea is that that is a guide which will be able to be provided to families at the point their child, we start to identify needs or they get added to the SEND support register at school. So it's an easy read guide to try and explain the whole system and what to expect. Another really positive project which happened recently was we co-produced a SEND local offer promotional video. So it was in partnership with a media company over in Media City. And it's all Trafford's own children and young people who have SEND. They all volunteered, or the parents or families did, to be involved in the video. And the idea is to try and get more traffic to the local offer website and generally raise awareness of it. So it was a really good example of a sort of co-produced project. So that was all the slides that I had. Any questions?
Okay, thank you very much. Does anybody have any questions?
No.
Dan?
The directory.
Yeah, the office inquiries, you only get about 5 a day. So I just wondered, does the website do most of the work, or could it be a case that people may not know you're there?
I think we have successfully achieved a channel shift to some degree where those parents who can will self-serve on the website. So yes, and I think those inquiries that come into the office, they're mainly around the childcare, the early education support to access those entitlements. So I think we have seen a decline in number of telephone calls, and I guess that's as more and more people, you know, can access information digitally.
Do you still have a big team in the office serving those calls, or is it reduced?
We have two full-time equivalents that work on the Trafford directory website, but also pick calls up. And then we have 1 full-time equivalent operating the telephone helpline, social media, and email. Then we have 2.2 whole-time equivalents working on the outreach service. That's the question.
Can I just ask quickly, is the line? I'd love to see that.
Do you want to see it? I have it here, so do you want to give me that back, Kathy? I can show you the video.
Has it got sound?
Yeah, will sound
What
work.
have you got sound?
I'll turn the sound up on my laptop. I'm not sure.
Trafford Send Local Offer is the place to find advice and support available for children and young people under 25 years old with special educational needs or disabilities. Trafford Send Local Offer is everything parents and carers need to know in one place, including information on education and training, health and social care services, education, health and care plans, fun things to do, events, training and support groups. Check it out online now. No web access? No problem. The Family Information Service helpline is available for you to call Monday to Friday, or you can meet with our outreach team out and about your local groups. You can also access the internet at a library or through your school. Trafford Send Local Offer makes it easier for you to get the help, advice and support you need in your area, helping you make informed choices for you and your family.
That was really good. Thank you. Has anybody got any questions at all? No? No. Well, in that case, thank you very much. That was very informative. We've had a pretty packed agenda this evening. We've managed to finish at a reasonable sort of time. So thank you all for coming. I do have one item, unless anybody else has got any other business at all. We've been asked to appoint a committee member to 3 boards. I don't know if anybody's interested. I'm happy to do them if nobody else is. Is Alex going to?
Well, I did email people out about asking the committee if they wanted to be involved in them. The only one who got back was Councillor Jerome, expressed his interest in, I think it was the Corporate Parenting Board, or was it the Start Well Board?
It was the Start Well Board.
Okay, that's fine. I mean, I'm happy to do the other 2. I believe they meet quarterly, but it's in the daytime. But if it's only quarterly, I can manage that.
The Start Well Board is, and the Health and Wellbeing Board are both in the day. And then the Corporate Parenting Board is, at the moment, it's once a quarter, and it's in the evening, starting at around 5 o'clock in the evening, and it's always on a Thursday as well. So I don't know if anyone would be interested in those.
That's right. If not, I'm happy to do them. So if we just let Alex know if anybody else is interested. But other than that, thank you all for coming, and wish you all a safe journey home.
Yeah.